No sane person who wants to preserve anything or is capable of preserving anything is going to say you should let anybody speak under any circumstance. No, you should not. A bad idea, repeated over and over again, will be adopted. The world is attention, as Jonathan Peugeot says. It's that simple. Therefore, you cannot give attention to just anyone. Period. End of statement. Not that hard. No one likes that answer, at least not on the left, but that's too bad, because there isn't a better answer. There isn't even another answer.
Than I am the intersectional left.
I mean, I think actually everybody should be, but the problem is that we're not confined to the choice. Well, there are not two choices on the table to which we are committed with a rifle to our head.
We gotta hold off on that. I want to let you finish your thought about
the fascism,
about the fascists, and then I want to get back to the question, because I think what we now have is a better question. Okay, you've compelled me that you're using a technique, that technique reveals patterns. You say you've seen one. I want to know whether the thing that you see is a natural grouping that I can recognize from my perspective with your help to find it, and we can talk about whether the term is right at that point, or it's not a natural thing, and you mentioned, or I guess you mentioned, ChatGPT was analogous to what you're doing. I want to know if you're hallucinating.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it does. I asked ChatGPT actually to write me just tangentially a short summary of woke right on a 10th grade reading level, so that I could maybe find something I could help people with. And it wrote me this thing, and it gave great examples, very lucid examples about Republican congressmen, or famous Republican congressman. I said, well, who is it? Oh, that's fictional. And it had like 4 or 5 of them. It just made them up, but it didn't mention that it made them up till I asked. So maybe this, but okay. So my question to you.
So that might have been a hint. Right. Why did it make them up? Well, one of the weaknesses of AI is if you tell it something is true, it will frame things as though that is the case. That may cause it to hallucinate facts, as it does with humans. Probably not a coincidence, just saying. And so rather than taking away a lesson, James has found a way to make it an agreement. And so everybody's missing the point. Like, all 3 of these guys are missing the point. The point is, even AI cannot find this pattern and has to rely on making up facts to make the pattern work. That's the lesson. There isn't another lesson. Why they don't know this, I don't want to even guess. But that was pretty obvious. That doesn't mean that AI is perfect, but he gave you the framing of his question, right? And within that framing, the only way to make it work is to hallucinate. And we've already seen indications of James doing that. We're going to see more, I think. I mean, I don't know, but I'm pretty sure.
What is the evolutionary relationship mimetically between communism and fascism? And historically, actually, there's a practical element as well, that everywhere that we end up with the fascist regimes in the 20th century, something preceded them, which was a decadent liberalism that was unable to manage affairs very well, which I will refer to as continental liberalism to compare it against American liberalism, which is a different philosophical grounding. But then you also had the incursion of Marxist agitation into that society. Mussolini was answering that in Italy. Hitler was answering that. That's what Mein Kampf is about, actually, in Germany. And that's literally the reason that Franco rose to power in Spain, was to stop the commies, right? And so the evolutionary link, what I was hoping that you would say, is reaction. So reactionary is a word. We're all familiar with the word. It's distinct from conservative. It somehow means something stronger, but it's reacting to this combination of a weak and decadent liberalism that is enabling a communist agitation. And what it sees, in my opinion, is that the weak and decadent liberalism is allowing which is ultimately very individualistic, is allowing a collectivist ideology to come in and destroy things. So you need collectivism to answer collectivism is part of the mentality.
Yeah.
Where is that collective? Well, what you had in communism is this universal
So wait a second,
idea.
you're saying you have
Okay. You know, James is so close because he missed a couple little facts, right? First of all, and Carl Benjamin talks about this, Sargon of Akkad. He's talked about this before, okay? If you actually read the history instead of hallucinating it, all fascists were communists first. Fascism is a leftist socialist ideology. That's the reason why the fascists fight the communists. As Carl Benjamin has said, fascism is honest socialism, right? Or communism. Doesn't matter. It's honest socialism. Like all socialism must end this way. This idea of a decadent liberalism is an indictment of liberalism, which he correctly identifies as, by definition, or at least we'll say recent definition, is individualistic, right? And so he says the collectivist, comes up. No, the collectivism is always there. So, little secret, maybe you didn't notice, you were born on a planet with a bunch of other people. Culture and society are words to describe certain layers or levels or hierarchy of collectiveness. It's technically, right? And so you didn't live in and cannot ever imagine ever a world that is not collectivist in some way. In fact, in almost every possible way. Okay, the internet is a collectivist project to, interestingly, enable more collectivism, which is kind of ironic. Okay, so this way of talking about collectivism rising up from the individualist ashes to fight the bad collectivism, the piece that he's missing in history, again, is these are all leftist ideologies. Correctly identifies the difference between, we'll say, continental philosophy and we'll say your Western, the rest of the West's philosophy, right? But the English philosophy or Great Britain's philosophy is slightly different than continental philosophy, and then the American philosophy is completely different because it's based bottom up. Continental philosophy is top down. So if you read, and you can, hopefully, and you have sufficient comprehension, which, maybe you can't have, fair enough, say the constitutional documents or the governance documents in Europe, they're very much the government grants the right to do X to Y, right? Y entity, right? Whereas the United States, as we hold these truths to be self-evident and starts talking about inalienable rights of persons. That's very different. That is bottom up as opposed to top down. That's not all it is. Maybe that's not even the most important component, although probably is the most important component. And so, yeah, even a manifestation or implementation of a European leftist ideology would look completely different in the US than it would in Europe. And it would look different in England. That's actually very important. Okay, if you haven't seen the Frontiers of Ideas video, which I shall link here if I remember, then you should watch that. Because it's a history video that I did with Adam, because it explains some of this stuff in a little bit more detail with some better examples. So James doesn't understand this, probably because he's not European and probably hasn't talked to enough Europeans to realize what continental philosophy is, and the fact that, again, most Europeans that I've ever spoken to are well aware that the fascists are all leftists. Every single one of them is a leftist. This is not a left versus right battle in Europe. And it's not decadent liberalism at all. It's the collapse of the hierarchy. It's the collapse of kingship. Right? Kingship is a type of collectivism. You collect under the king, under the rule of the king. And so, well, yeah, when that goes away, you need a new collectivism to form a society, which is a collective. Like, it's not that hard. Like, I don't know where these people are getting this from, but it's weird to start talking about societies and cultures and countries and pretend like there's a decadent individualist liberalism that applies. Those are abstract words to define a collective. I don't understand. It's a set, guys. It's not that hard. Is it single item person or is it multiple persons collective? Not that hard. That really is, the way it is. I mean, you can not talk about either, obviously, but you also can't do, we'll say individualistic groups of people that also form a society. It doesn't make any sense. This is why they're confused. So I wanted to point that out because it's like I'm sitting there like, what is he saying? Well, because he's right about 99% of it, but he has the most important 1% wrong. And so he just says gobbledygook. It's crazy. A decadent liberalism. And you notice they haven't even talked about the collapse of the monarchy. What about the Prussian Empire, bro? Could the collapse of the Prussian Empire have had some, and this is another danger of the myth of World War II. Now, I've put that video out, the monologue. I also live stream. The beginnings are the same. It's just a monologue, but the live stream has some additional content, after the monologue's finished. If you believe there was a thing such as World War II, you're already in the wrong frame and you're completely screwed historically, right? Because where does World War I come from? Well, it actually comes out of the collapse of the empire and the shooting of royalty and the collapse of that royalty and that domino effect of collapsing royalties right up to the Russian Revolution, which we also have a video on. I have a video on that with Adam. Is the driving force, is the result of the driving force that causes the Great War. And that driving force just continues to roll. Now, that's a very large thing, high momentum. We're still suffering from that. When Burn Powers, the anadromist, great channel, kind of. Still too long. Videos are too long. He talks about this in the beginning of how we got here, right? There's a trauma from the war. The Great War. There's a trauma from that. Yeah, absolutely. But more importantly, that was the result of this materialist thread from the result of the French Revolution. And you can identify the pattern of the French Revolution as a decadent liberalism. You're missing what caused that. The thing that caused everybody to run around in domicide and start beheading everybody else, roughly speaking, was the fact that when you have a situation where you have no structure, no king, no hierarchy, you end up in chaos. It's that simple. It's structure, which is a type of order, right? Or chaos. This is where Jordan Peterson comes in handy. And once you understand that, you're like, oh, it wasn't a decadent liberalism, right? It was parasites feeding off the body of the beheaded king, effective in every possible way. That's not metaphorical. There's a dead body left behind by the death of the monarchy, much as there was with Russia. All these revolutions have patterns, which I've talked about in other videos. And so that's what's happening. It's just that you have to see those patterns at that scale. And James isn't looking at that scale. And maybe he can't, right? Fair enough. Like, maybe you find patterns. Maybe you find half the patterns. Maybe they're the wrong half, or the least important half, or the least interesting half. Or maybe you see patterns at this layer and not the larger patterns or the smaller patterns. And therefore not where the patterns repeat at scale, where they're invariant patterns. That's far more interesting. Read Nassim Taleb if you need to know more about that.
Nationalist collectivism responding to communist
to
collectivism.
Universal
Got it.
polarized.
In a pragmatic fashion. It's
This works for me.
Yeah.
So communism has a dipolar or bipolar, I don't know. Bipolar is better, I guess. As a bipolar universal framework. It's in fact, as I mentioned the word, I'll say it anyway, it's the Manichaean Gnostic framework recreated in social politics and economics. What you have in fascism is, holy crap, this is going to ruin us. Our current system is not capable of stopping this. So we're going to replicate the parts that work, and we're going to get rid of the parts that the universalist radical egalitarianism at the bottom of communism, and we're going to replace it with a rigid hierarchical structure around national identity defined in one of three ways, which is, again, ethnic, cultural, or just political. So what you end up with is, rather than everybody in the world being alienated from who they really are, or in other words, their inheritance, by dint of some original sin, the introduction of private property that becomes the basis for exploitation, whatever the story is, what you have instead in fascism is that there is a rightful inheritor to that national object and its fruits, which they have been alienated from by the excesses of tolerance of the soft liberalism that has allowed the Marxist agitation of radical egalitarianism. So you have radical anti-egalitarianism in a nationalist identity framework, which can be intersectional across ethnicities and across polities and across cultural aspects.
Wow. Just what? It's a fascinating explanation. It's not even wrong. It just implies a set of reasoning that was never done. Okay, as I mentioned in my Trick of Socialism video, you should check that out. You don't do away with the hierarchy. Okay, there's zero egalitarianism in communism. What the hell he's talking about, right? They're lying about that. Karl Marx is lying. He's telling you something that cannot possibly be true, that you know is not true in some level of your consciousness or unconsciousness, more likely, right? And then convincing you on the basis of that lie that you need to proceed a certain way. Okay. The evil dictators, especially the great ones that actually controlled countries, all knew this, figured it out, because they were actually smart, unlike Karl Marx, who's actually got about 6-year-old, about the level intellectual capacity of a 6-year-old. I mean that technically, right? You listen to a 6-year-old, they will spew Marxist rhetoric for sure, line for line in some cases, many cases. I've heard it before, and I was like, wait a minute, that's something out of Das Kapital. You're 6, you didn't read Das Kapital, you can barely read. How did you come up with, the same way Marx did? It's not that hard. It's not that hard. So you haven't been around enough children. Precocious ones, for sure. Not all children, but also, it doesn't matter. So if that's your explanation for why these two leftist ideologies that are in all ways similar, and that one clearly comes out of the other, your explanation is not that, but it is an explanation, and people don't know the history well enough to know all fascists were communists first, then your explanation might be correct, except that it definitely is wrong. So this whole idea, and what are you going to do? Oh, we have to have collectivism because liberalism turns into decadence. Like, I'm not sure you're solving a problem here. I don't know where he's getting this bipolar communism from. He didn't describe anything bipolar or dichotomous at all. I mean, he thinks he did. I get that part. But also, so it's understandable how James is confused, because he doesn't know the history. Or he knows some of the history, but not the important parts of the history. Right? The important part of the history is not, did George Washington cut down the cherry tree? The important part of the history is what that represents. He's honest. He's honest when it matters. He's honest when it matters to his own detriment. That's a good thing to know about a person. Does it have to be represented by a physical event in history that was witnessed by some number of people? Maybe has some video on it that wasn't generated by AI. You see where the problem's going here? No. The symbolic representation is more correct or truer than true, as Jordan Peterson would say. It just drives me nuts. Self-reference is bad. There's better ways to do that, Jordan. You need to upgrade your vocab.
Okay, let me ask you a question. So, by the way, I do think I now get where you are.
Mm-hmm.
I do think you're hallucinating, and I'll tell you why. But this is productive. I get your taxonomy now. what were the three things around which we could group ethnic,
cultural, and political? 3 ways to define a nation.
All right. Yeah, I think I know why I do disagree with you, and I think I do disagree. The argument I have made, so again, not coming from mathematical groupings, but coming from sort of biology of people, I've made the argument that communism has an unfortunate analogy or an unfortunately tight connection in our minds with Marx. And my point is, Marx didn't invent this. It's actually something that will canonically re-evolve when certain conditions occur, which you've described.
Material conditions, it's reacting to something real.
Well, and I think I know exactly what it is. Nature is a free market, more or less. Okay, free market to the extent that it works correctly looks like what happens in nature. There's resources, creatures figure out ways to access those sources. They exclude other creatures from the resources. That's kind of the way it's the downside and the upside linked.
What? They exclude other creatures from those resources? Huh. Let's try a thought experiment. What if resources were limited, which is how you can identify them as resources, by the way, because things that are unlimited you never think about. Do you ever think about the air you're breathing? I got that from the Matrix, didn't I? No, but also it's in the Matrix. We'll do that video, I promise. Yeah, you don't think about air because it's until and unless it becomes a limited resource. Right. Until then, it's not a resource. It's just what you do. It's out of your consciousness entirely, as it should be, by the way, until it becomes scarce. And then all of a sudden you're like, I need more resource air. I've experienced this. This has happened to me. Okay, so that's one thing. Not all things are resources. So what if resources, by definition, as the case, you can disagree with the case, that's fine. But I'm going to tell you right now, there are limits on resources at some point. So what if creatures don't prevent creatures from those resources? They're just limited and they get used up because maybe there's only enough resources for a certain number of creatures. Like, hard stop. Does this sound like a familiar argument? This is all the climate change arguments, all the arguments about why we shouldn't drill for oil. Like, all of these arguments are predicated on that it's a true statement. The problem is they usually don't know how much of a resource is available or how to manipulate the usage of it, right? They also usually use a bunch of tricks, like if all the people in the world use this much oil, and it's like, what percentage of population actually uses oil? Oh, they don't tell you that. I wonder why that is. That might be a hint. So Bret's conception is just bizarre. This is what happens when leftists try to justify leftism. This is it. All three of these guys, they're all leftists. They're all trying to save leftism, right? It's not liberalism they're trying to save necessarily, although maybe that too, but they're leftists trying to be on the right side of history or whatever, and they're just wrong, and they're just wrong. I'm sorry that they're wrong. I'm sad that they're wrong. Also, they're wrong though, so like it's good to know. It's easier to proceed that way. So yeah, they're very much we'll say on the wrong side of this, what a weird, like, resources exist and therefore your access to them must be mediated by other creatures. No. Just ignoring the fact that resources exist in a larger frame than other creatures. Like, there might be a finite amount of ore on the planet. I don't know. And the access to that might be regulated by how physically close it is to you, how hard it is to get out of the ground, how many other people you can get to help you, because you can't mine ore alone. Right? It might be that. In other words, your ability to cooperate in a collective might be the thing preventing you from the resources, which might have nothing to do with other people. It might be that you're a jerk and no one wants to play with you because you're a jerk. There's a possibility. I only mention it because holy mackerel, do I see that in all kinds of places. So, just to upgrade the worldview a little bit, because now everything Bret says isn't going to make any sense at all. I'm predicting into the future with my super brain. Let's do it.
When people are grouped so as to have something free market-like and natural in this regard, especially in the context of a governmental structure that can actually interrupt the functioning of that market, there comes a point at which something like 50% of the population recognizes that if forced to compete, they will be on the losing end. That for whatever reason, either through their own error, but more often because they just weren't given the proper environment to arm them for that competition, they know, I live in a system in which I am destined to be a loser. Now, those losers have an incentive to collectively overthrow that system and redistribute its product. They may even have a legitimate gripe. If the system is corrupt, the point may be, hey, you're actually, living large on the productivity of my work for no good reason.
Okay. So you can remember now. You probably missed it. Fair enough. You gotta remember, Bret started this whole thing with people unfortunately associate communism with Karl Marx. And then he restates Karl Marx's case as a refutation that somehow communism is connected with Karl Marx. Dude, that's actually his case. It's what he wrote. That's exactly what he wrote. I mean, this fails to account for everything. Like, actually everything. The fourth grader's explanation of the world and how it's unfair. It's unfair. I can't have a cookie before dinner. I'm sorry, but that's hysterical. You gotta notice the framing. Something like 50%. Why would it be 50%? Why? And why would they, quote, realize that they're going to be, we'll say, alienated from or prevented from this resource? Why? How would they do that? What if they don't even know about the resource? What if the resource is gold and it's of no value to a farmer ever? Yeah. Did you know in the Middle Ages, like if you were a farmer and you had gold on your land, it wasn't yours. It wasn't yours. It belonged to the king. And the king would take it. Why? Because if you took it and tried to do something with it, well, first of all, you'd have gold ore. It would be of no use to you. Because you don't have that, right? You don't have the ability to do anything with it. And the people that do aren't going to give you the time of day because probably not worth it. And also, what are they going to do with it? Because gold in the Middle Ages is really only useful for waging war. Right? Gold in general is only used or useful for large scale, large dollar transactions. In other words, you can't buy food with it. There was never a time when you could buy food with gold. That just didn't happen. Right? Except in Egypt after Menser came around and screwed up the economy for 30 years by bringing all the I think it was Ethiopian gold, or the gold from the just south of Egypt, into the economy, flooded the economy with gold, destroyed the economy for 30 years or something stupid. Other than that, no one would, gold was never common enough to use in daily transactions. Now, of course, Bret doesn't have a sophisticated understanding of, well, we'll just leave that blank. And certainly not economics at scale, right? So the scale, which is partly tied up in the speed of transfer. This is why the Bitcoin people are idiots. You're never going to be able to trade Bitcoin for Bret because it takes 10 minutes to do a transaction. And they lie about that, but it does. And then, well, the Lightning, all of those things break completely technical. I'm a technical guy, 40 plus years of computer experience. I'm telling you right now, break completely everything that Bitcoin claims to do. Everything. The Lightning is not secure. Like, you put something on top of it, you're adding layers, you're breaking the thing that makes it safe. The thing that makes it safe is the time that it takes to process the block. If you make it under 10 minutes, you've broken Bitcoin. Congratulations. Just is what it is. People don't understand that. There are foundational principles that if you go around them, they have consequences. Those consequences are severe. And that is one of the many things these people don't recognize. Just as a technical matter, they don't get it. Fair enough, they don't get it. Also, they don't get it. Like, I don't know why they don't get it, but they don't get it. So Bret's not accounting for any of this because he doesn't understand any of this. But restating the Marxist case, I mean, yes, Marx did not produce original material. I've been over this. Any child can produce the same material. The world is unfair. Where? But this idea that you can know what 50% of the people and how they realize something that they couldn't possibly like, it's not practical for people to have these ridiculous realizations about, we'll say, their own station in life or their own position. The idea of a position in life is a relative idea. When you are in that position, you cannot, by definition, ever see that position. This is the fish in the aquarium problem, right? You can't see that you're in an aquarium because you're in it. You can't see that you're in a position because you're in it. Now, can some big brain smart dude, allegedly, although none of them seem to be, to tell you that from their third person perspective, that might be a key to this whole thing, by the way, that you're in this position relative to this other thing? Well, of course, the relative position from a third perspective is different than the position that you think you're in or feel that you're in or can interact with. The fish can't see it's in an aquarium, but anybody outside the aquarium can clearly see that the fish is in an aquarium. It's not that hard. Why these people struggle with easy questions, I don't know. But they do. And so he's invoking already in this a collective, right, thing. But again, they're failing to recognize there's an existing collective. So all they're actually talking about is rebellion at this point. Oh, there's an existing collective. Everything's working fine. Not everybody can participate equally in any collective, ever, by definition. Right, because we don't live in an equal world. Equality doctrine is stupid, wrong, and evil. So don't do that. Like, all the confusion proceeds from there, right? We're all equal individuals. Everything about that statement is wrong. Not even possible. And so when you're in objective material reality, this is the way you talk about the world without realizing you're even doing it, right? There's some, like, I don't know, mystical unconscious force implied where 50% of the people come to some mystical insight realization all at the same time. And then they realize the other people like them realize this. And then they form a collective. That's the thesis here. It has to be. There's no other explanation because he can't explain it any other way. And then they're like, aha, the system is against us. What? The system is preventing us from having a thing that we can't use and don't know about. Okay, probably.
Right? It's not my fault that you sent me to a shitty school and I don't have the ability to compete in this market, or the market isn't as open as it looks and I can't get access to it. So let's just overthrow the thing, right? Mm-hmm. And the point is, so they create a phony story about the natural order of things and the equality of this, that, and the other that gets the losers to group together. They overthrow the system, and it turns out their utopian vision doesn't work at all, and there's a pile of skulls, right? So
okay. They overthrow the system, and they need to put a new system in its place because you can't do without systems. And in the process of overturning the system, you have to get rid of the people who know about and follow the pattern of the old system. That's a better way to say it. Right. And so this is really about, I don't like your system. I want to be the system, or I want my system to be the system. Fair enough. You're also an idiot, and shut up. But hey, whatever.
That natural process happens, and the version of it that we know well is Marx, just as the version of genocide we know well is Hitler, right? So he's too closely associated. It's a natural process, and it's one that we should learn to spot and interrupt. And the key thing is those who advocate for the free market have to do a much better job of making sure that the market matches the brochure, that it actually does provide access to people so that they have an incentive not to overthrow it.
Can I?
Okay, there's a lot of assumptions in here, right? Like again, they're talking about this invisible magic hand from above. Look, that's actually what he's describing here. Whether he realizes it or not, I don't think he does, because these people are all the same in that regard. There's an invisible hand from above that gave you a brochure, by the way. That might be important. Gave you a brochure, and that has to match, right? Like what's in the brochure, whatever that would even look like. Such a weird way to talk about the world. It's so strange. It has to match. Otherwise, you'll get angry and overthrow. But you notice also, he doesn't want to overthrow the current collective for the new collective. But he's not saying what the current collective is, and he's alternating between, well, they might be good or they might be bad. And he's saying the only discrepancy is that they're misadvertising their services. What? What? I mean, I guess that maybe they didn't know they had to advertise to you, dude. It could be. It could be an easier explanation is that there are a bunch of imperfect people in all layers, hierarchy, in all sections of societies, cultures, and rebellions, right? And they all have, we'll say, some set of common imperfections, and they're doing their thing that they're trying to do to whatever ability they can, which might be really important to differentiate, but whatever, we'll just set that aside, because you notice they're not talking about people with different abilities, capabilities, skills, and knowledge at all. Everyone's equal. Everyone's equally brilliant, capable, competent, smart, whatever in Bret's mind. Unfortunately, only in his mind, because in the real world, that's not the way it is. And then you've got that, that set of collectives fighting. And the second collective is a rebellion, and we need to put it down. We need to stop that. And the way we stop that is the first collective, which I haven't called the collective and still won't name, has to somehow advertise better, because otherwise I'll get upset because I had an expectation that wasn't met. When I was growing up, it was life isn't fair. Get over it. That might be a solution right there. Or the acknowledgement that the system you think, it's weird too, because he says it, right? Or they implement their system and that just causes a bunch of death. And it might be that they're incompetent and that they believe they have a better system, but in fact they do not. Isn't that a far more likely scenario? And this whole idea of free market. Okay. In the stock market in particular, they have a thing called market makers. What a weird phrase. Unless, of course, markets are made, you will not find a neutral, objective material market anywhere in the world with anything. In nature, out of nature, in your imagination, in a computer video game, it's never going to happen. Markets are made. They're built. They're ordered systems that are created or manifested by humans based on certain values using certain principles. If you get wiped out in a market, there's a couple of possibilities, maybe more than two, but I'm only going to list two because these people are a little slow. And so I'm going to assume they can't track more than two items at once because they haven't tried to yet. So I suspect it's because they can't. It could be that somebody has done something unfair to you, or tricked the system somehow, or whatever. Or it could be you don't know how the system works and you're missing a key detail. Those are two very real possibilities that I see happen all the time. It's not necessarily that the brochure was wrong, and it's not necessarily that the system is broken. It could be that you're an idiot. Or it could be that you didn't do your homework and the brochure was correct and you didn't read it. Could be any of those things. Not two things. I mean, there's two main things, right? It could be some kind of misapplication of the market or market rules or market system, either through lying or base fraud or finding a hole in the market rules, whatever. But because nothing is, it's almost like we live in an imperfect world and there were imperfect people. And so even if you lived in a perfect world, an imperfect person wouldn't implement a perfect system because they're imperfect, right? It really is basic. Like, this is basic logic, and they're just missing the basic logic because they're starting in the middle of free market, whatever that's supposed to mean. What do you mean free? No markets are free anyway. So what are you talking about? The idea of a market is, first of all, you have to opt into a market. And then I'll go, well, some of these markets affect you whether you're playing in them or not. Yeah, the flapping of the butterfly wings affects you in Texas. I don't care. These are not interesting statements of the world. So keep that in mind. This free market is an oamarchic. It's an objective material reality fantasy that they project onto the world, right? Which is a perfection. And this is why leftists, which Bret clearly is, always ruin the world because they have a perfect idea of how it's supposed to work and they try to implement it.
That's really good. But so I don't disagree with you because I see what you're saying, but I think you're jumping the gun because I see the right, intellectuals on the right, many of them, trying to equip MAGA with an ideology, a successor ideology that's similar to what you're talking about. But if we use the term woke and we call this its nascent idea space, like everyone saw the recent tweet about heterodoxy being on the right and then the left being this coordinated nothingness, an NPC world. So there are lots of ideas in this space, and for me, it's looking more like a soup of ideas, a lot of interesting stuff, and a lot of valid grievances. And in there is the risk that you're trying to nip in the bud. But in nipping it in the bud and going too hard after this kind of woke thing, there are all these legitimate grievances that if we cut off, then the ideologues are going to have their day in the sun.
Well, that's
so
the third
I
round
want to listen to.
I like Mike. Mike still has the best take so far. I mean, he's still wrong, but he's a really clear line of reasoning and thought. The problem is, this is the funny part, by definition in the United States, the conservatives, according to Bret even, are correct. What they're doing is, like, another way to talk about what Mike just said is to say the conservatives let too many liberals or leftists run institutions and organizations, and they immediately corrupted them because they can't do anything else. Listen to the way these guys talk. How are they going to run anything important? None of these three could run anything important. They'd run it into the ground in 4 seconds. Even if Karl Marx's ideas were coherent, which they're not, and comprehensible, which they're not, and correct, which they're definitely not, and you implemented them, if these three implemented them, they'd end up at the same disaster as always. That's more important. It doesn't matter what system you give the Three Stooges here. You're going to get a bloodbath for sure. And so more likely, a better frame is they let a bunch of leftists run things, right? They gave them more control and power than they should have. And they're running pedophile rings in the government. This is well documented at this point, right? Jeffrey Epstein aside, but that's happened, right? They're sending money to their own organizations and laundering money using U.S. aid. We've seen the receipts. That's happened, right? So, they're wrecking the military. Okay, that's happened, right there. That politicized the FBI. Okay, all of these things happened very clearly. You just look it up. You just do some research. Very clearly, when the Democrats were in control, they did these things on purpose, knowingly, deliberately, with forethought, and malice. Okay? That's what happened. Now we have to fix that. Okay? The only people that can conserve a system are conservatives. Yeah. Like, really, it's all in the word. Okay? If you have to ask conserve what, that means you're blind to what is happening, which is already true, by the way, but whatever. And you don't understand, if you don't understand what they're like, conserve the spirit of the Constitution, not necessarily the wording of the Constitution, by the way, because the Constitution's wording is not designed to be legalistic. In fact, it's designed quite the opposite. If you read the Constitution and you read it as like a guidebook or handbook, a how-to, then you're the problem. People like you are the problem. Don't do that. Okay, if that's the way you read things, if you're legalistic and you read the Constitution as a legalistic document instead of a document about values, principles, and virtues, right, and how they relate, because that's what it is, then you will misunderstand what it is saying and what its spirit is and how it is to be implemented. It's not that there aren't legalistic implementation details in there, but man, are they vague. Are really vague on purpose. That was deliberate. These guys knew what they were doing. Don't believe me? Read the Federalist Papers and then read the Constitution. Wait a minute, there's way more detail in the Federalist Papers. Why didn't it make it into the Constitution? These Federalist Papers are way more legalistic. Right, that's correct. Right? They're going through the legalistic experiments. Legalistically, if we enact this language, what happens? Oh, that's bad. Let's not use that language. Let's use language that points to the spirit that we want to imbue in the body of the nation of the United States. Problem solved. Mostly. Kind of. If only we had perfect people to implement our imperfect system. Oh, wait, that won't work. Seems like we're doing okay, though. 250 years, man. At least not since the Roman Empire has there been a government that lasted so long. And these people, I don't know where they stand with respect to that. But anybody who says conserve what really doesn't understand what they're talking about. Probably shouldn't listen to them about anything interesting, important, or difficult. Right? Because they got problems. Big problem. Vision problem. Like eyes to see problems. Like you can't fix that. And you shouldn't have to. Like there's no need to know. Zathras not good at understanding. Zathras good at doing. Babylon 5. Brilliant. 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 Oh, great stuff.
Hold on. This resonates for me. I think you see something. And
I know I see something.
You
but
do.
I agree, you see something.
Well,
I've been looking at it for a while now.
I do too, but I now have a pretty good. I mean, you just spotted it.
Yeah.
The point is, he sees something crystallizing. Okay.
Yep.
It's too early to say it's a thing because it isn't a thing, and in fact, it might not be a thing.
It's definitely a thing.
Well, I'm not saying that.
Well, all the pieces are in place, so right. I get that you're worried about it,
but it's
a set of facts.
Okay. Mike is super. The pieces are there. Let me tell you when else the pieces are there for this thing. All the time throughout history at every point. I think every day, every hour, every minute, every second. All of these pieces to do this have been here. How do you know, Mark? Because there was one event called creation. In that, all the pieces that we have now have always been here. It's that simple. I promise. It really is that simple. This is the problem of science. When you dissect, you think you can then just put it back together any way you want. And look, absolutely, you can organize a genocide. Like, you can't, you're incompetent, but whatever. Somebody, a charismatic leader, and even an uncharismatic leader, because that's happened too. Oh, no one ever tells you that, do they? Weird how they just link charisma to evil. But charisma is a thing. Like, that piece is also always here. You can look at any charismatic person and go, they might become the bad guy. And people do. You could look at any charismatic person and go, that's how they led people. That may also be true, but there have been uncharismatic leaders as well. Misidentification much? This is what happens when you divide the world, and then you don't see that certain pieces cannot go with certain other pieces, and that when certain pieces that can go together are put together, bad things happen, because that's actually more to the point. Then you end up with nonsense like this, which is called hallucination, correctly identified earlier in the conversation. Not making this up. I'm just going to try to use mostly their language.
Actions, some
Yes.
of which are bent on gathering power to themselves
No question.
through Machiavellian techniques,
Yep.
which are very similar to the communist manipulation.
Let me just, quick aside. Machiavelli didn't have techniques. I don't know what James read. Okay. I know what I have read. The Prince. Okay. Those are not techniques. They are observations of how the world works at that particular layer of hierarchy. Now, some of how that works also scales down the hierarchy, and so that you and I can recognize some of those things at a different scale. That's called scale invariant pattern. Sure, I agree. However, how they work at the scale of I can command an army is very different than how they work with I can command my family, right? It's different. Right? But the pattern's there and you can recognize it and go, it's the same. It's Machiavelli. No, it's an identifiable pattern. Machiavelli, the way it's written says this. This happens. The prince can, the prince must, the prince should. Right. It's advice to him. It's not, here's the way I think the world should work. It's, here's the way the world works. That's what these people are all always missing. Everybody on the left is always missing. There is a way that the world works that is unchangeable, unchanging. You need to account for it and not try to change or eliminate it, because you can't. But you can account for it and make it as better as you can make it. And they don't like that answer, because in science, we can be precise and accurate, which is a lie. We can be precise and accurate and do away with the things we don't want. How's that cancer stuff going?
In their own right. And my hypothesis, which I've referred to for a long time as the law of intolerant factions, is that soup you're talking about will be dominated by the ideologues unless they are identified. Because the most intolerant faction, through Machiavellian techniques, unless they are identified and people are hopefully brought back out of that lost sense of grievance. I don't want to cancel people, but you do it eventually. The solution to the paradox of tolerance at some level requires quarantining sufficiently intolerant views. And the reason that it will win is the same reason that Conquest Second Law is so widely recognized here across the right.
Okay, there's so many things wrong. You notice what they're doing is they're injecting these words like power. Has anybody defined power? What is this power and how do you obtain it? Oh, we don't mention that. We just appeal to Machiavelli, who made a bunch of observations about how the world works. There's no technique there. Sorry, it's not there. If you read that, that was in your head and not in the text. So he's introducing all of these terms like ideology. What's an ideology? How are you telling an ideology from not an ideology? He doesn't mention any of that. He doesn't have answers to that. He doesn't have answers to that because he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's that easy. It's that simple. Like, you can just lay it out. I keep laying out better frames for what they're talking about that make more sense and use zero new words, right? Zero. Isn't it that hard? Isn't it that hard? Right? And so, I'm defining my terms, right? Continental philosophy versus philosophy of England, roughly the UK, Britain, versus philosophy of the US. Those are three distinct things, very easy to determine, define, observe, right? Very easy. And they're not doing that. Why aren't they doing that? Because they're relying on their fantasy world. That's this is one of the tricks people use. What do you mean power? What do you mean intolerant? What do you mean by cancel? Do you mean fire people who don't belong doing what they're doing because they're either incompetent, corrupt, lack the skill, lack the ability, their competent skill or ability has changed over time. That might be something like old age, by the way, right? They were put in the wrong place to begin with by mistake. Are any of those removal reasons cancellation? Because that's how James is talking. He's talking as if you remove somebody from a position, you have canceled them. And why would cancel be the word? What are you talking about? This is the same sort of verbal trick that they use with illegal immigrant. Illegal immigrant means something very specific and clear, right? It means their immigration was a crime, right? It was an immigration style crime. Either they came here on a visa and overstayed it, or they came here without a visa. They snuck into the country, right? They have immigrated to the country, therefore they are an immigrant, right? But they are an illegal immigrant, as opposed to a person who follows the rules. That would be a legalistic, following the rules, weird, immigrant. But what James is doing is he's saying cancellation, as though it's linked to something other than firing people who need to be fired. Well, there is something like that. And if you use the word canceled properly, you are referring to a cancellation not based on meritocratic reasoning. Fair enough. Fair enough. That's a good definition of canceled. So you have a way in which you think you have a world where, and Bret already alluded to this, right? I'm not making any of this up. I'm not adding things to their conversation. I don't have to. It's silly enough on its own. There's a meritocracy, and he doesn't talk about how it broke down or if it's broken down. He just alludes to maybe it's broken down, which is just a little weird, right? Like, this is the difference between the left and the right. The right's like, no, this stuff's all corrupt and broken and we're going to fix it. And the left is like, well, maybe it's broken. Maybe it's okay. I don't know. Maybe the pedophilia rings are fine, or the gross incompetence is at the border is fine, or the ridiculous lack of reasoning on the left is fine. Maybe. Like, no. That's the difference. Like, some people are certain and confident about their position, and some people are on the left. Coincidence? You decide, I guess. I don't guess. And so they've got this idea, basically, that there's this maybe good, bad, okay sort of systemy thing, and maybe something's wrong, maybe not. But if you fire anybody out of it, you're canceling them. And that's like some kind of horrible crime. I don't understand that. Like, I don't know why you shouldn't be moved to a better place if you were in a bad place. And the canceling seems to be linked to identity. And it's linked to identity in two distinct ways. One is you have over-identified with your position. And so when you lose your position, you freak out. Like, oh, that's totally unfair. I can't be no longer a comedian, right? I still must be a comedian, even though I've been canceled. For what? For your previous identity, right? Because you made a racist joke 10 years ago. So it's about your identity then and your identity now and a change of rules. Who's changing the rules and why? Because that's what matters to the firing. Did you get fired because you're lazy? Did you get fired because you were promoted in there to as a trial and it just didn't work out? Did you get fired because you didn't show up for work? Or did you get fired because your boss doesn't like you? Those are different things. Did you get fired because you made an error 5 years ago in the same position? Did you get fired because your new boss wants to put some ideology checkbox person in place of you? See, these are all different reasons. And those reasons matter, right? The action of the firing is irrelevant. The reason for the firing is relevant. How you get fired is different. So some people, I have many reports of this, by the way, some people have told me like, oh, no, they put this person in place and stole all my work. Now, I had that happen to me, right? I mean, I destroyed all my work and they got nothing, but oh well, that's what happens when you screw with somebody who actually is competent. They'll just pull their competence away. So, that happens. It happens all the time. It's been happening for probably ever, right? This isn't new or different, right? Just somebody gets put in place. That incompetent person has a different set of, we'll say, checkboxes, right? That they fulfill. And that's why they've been chosen. They're the chosen one. That happens. That 100% happens. There's no question about it. Definitely happens. Okay. But that's different from firing people because they're incompetent, because they're lazy, because they started drinking, right? There's lots of legitimate reasons why people get fired. And if you get fired publicly, like you get publicly called out as having made a racist joke in the past, and now you can't perform publicly anymore, were you fired? You might have been canceled, but you weren't fired. Doesn't make any sense. Right? Did you lose opportunities because your reputation was impugned? Maybe. That's one method of firing people or canceling them. Now, maybe you flew young women around the world to powerful people and your reputation should be garbage. I don't know. But the important part is the second one and not the this happened. Like, I understand that sometimes your reputation gets ruined and sometimes it's well deserved. I'm not going to cry if you get something well deserved or even deserved at all. In fact, it doesn't have to be well deserved. It can just be deserved. And these are different things. They're not differentiating those things at all. They're just using the word cancel and then saying, well, you can't cancel, right? You can't be tolerant towards the intolerant. The people who are intolerant are said to be intolerant for a reason. It is that reason that you should not tolerate them. It is not the intolerance part that you should not tolerate them for. That doesn't make any sense. It's the reason why we call them intolerant. That's almost like an identification against. Dun, dun, dun. Always a bad sign.
Have an advantage over disorganized.
You're jumping the gun.
And intolerance will beat tolerance every time.
Here's the problem. We have a new player in this story. And that new player has powerful advocates. The alternative to the pattern of history that you are describing is what I would call the West. Okay? The West is the alternative to going through this cycle.
Okay. This point of historical fact, the cycle James described only applies to the West. I'm just going to tell you right now. It doesn't actually apply to any other part of the world. Not the Middle East and not the East. So that's kind of funny that Bret says this. I just... Can you imagine if they actually read history books? Wow. Whatever would they do with their lives? I got nothing. I don't know what it would do to them. They shouldn't do it. Very dangerous. Their entire worldview would be shattered and they'd probably go nuts. Well, more nuts.
The West has never been completed as a project. Mm-hmm. There are days when it shines. There are days when it embarrasses itself.
What? Wait, what do you mean completed? Okay, let's hold on a second here. Notice what's going on. Bret, who must be God at this point, has declared that the West has never been completed as a project. He hasn't defined the West, he hasn't defined completed, and he hasn't defined what the project is. You can define what the project is, by the way, without declaring whether or not it's been completed. That's why there's 3 pieces of information missing, which makes that statement technically unable to be made sense of or unable to be meaningful ever. You have 3 undefined terms that I would argue, maybe this is an argument we could have, are undefinable. What is the project of the West? How would you know what are the criteria, right? The success criteria is what I used to call them in consulting, that it was completed. How would you know that? Right? And what is the definition of the West? You need all three of those, and you have zero of them in order to make any sense of his statement. And then you have to take it on faith that he would know these things and that his declaration that the West is an uncompleted project or a project that has never been completed was correct. Now tell me how that's different from any religious belief. It isn't. You have to take it on faith that he knows those three things and that his statement about those three things is correct. Now, what your brain does is it inserts, well, you know what the West is. Of course you do. I know what the West is. Everybody knows what the West is. Unfortunately, we have different definitions for what it is, but we all know what it is. See the trick? That is true. For each person, this is called a general for specific confusion. For each person, they have definitions for all three of these things. They definitely do, right? And if they don't in the moment, they will fill it in their brains because we do that. That's what we do as humans. We do. We want to communicate. We want to get along. We want to understand. We want to know. We shouldn't want to do any of those things necessarily. We should be discerning about all those things, but we're not right now. Why? Tolerance. That's the problem. And so we're too forgiving. I don't forgive anybody for anything ever. How's that? Oop. No quarter. Sorry, not getting it. So what happens is at the scale of you or any other person that you can imagine, because you're only one of the persons in the world ever, and you're the same one, by the way. You can't swap persons. Have a definition for these three things. Definitely. And you'll make one up if you don't. Definitely. Almost everybody. Not everybody. Almost everybody. I don't do this. I go, wait, what are you talking about? Right. And then if you try to drill down, they're going to go, well, we don't have time to define our terms. Yeah, I'm sure we don't. I'm sure we also don't have the ability to do so, which is the more important part of the equation. You don't have time to try and describe your terms in a way that's ever going to make any sense because you're wrong. It's that simple, right? And so everybody's conception is different, sometimes only slightly different, but more often when you're talking about big abstractions like the West, which is a very big abstraction, talking about a lot of cultures, a lot of ethnicities, a lot of governance, types of governance or governments, right? A lot of nuance, a lot of religious beliefs. Like the West covers a lot of stuff. I'm not sure it's a cohesive category. I'm not sure. It might be. I mean, I would make a case. It would just be mine. And so we're not good at even thinking at that layer of abstraction, right? As I've just pointed out. And then there's this project. Well, again, we're all going to fill it in, but we don't all agree on what the project is. And we don't all agree on what completed means. Right? And so what we fill in is, well, the sense of uneasiness that I have about the future is the fact that the project of the West is uncompleted because I'm in the West. It's perfectly logical, rational, and reasonable, and wrong, but you can be logical, rational, reasonable, and wrong all at the same time, and people don't understand that. I understand that that's probably a bridge too far for you. I get it, but also, trust me, bro, this is not hard. Bret's doing it right now. What he's saying is logical, rational, and reasonable, and clearly wrong. I've just demonstrated is wrong. Whatever he's talking about cannot be correct because he's making a statement from a God's eye view or objective material reality view down onto the world, and he's casting his judgment on undefined things. They're undefined. He can't be right. It's not possible. But it feels good. It feels good to me too. I'm like, yeah, the Project West's not been completed. Okay. You could say something very similar to that, which would sound and feel the same to certain types of people, right? You could say we have not yet built God's kingdom on earth. That's the same statement. He doesn't even realize it. It's so funny. It's funny to me. Sorry if you didn't catch it. That's what I'm here for.
But the idea of a level playing field in which all ideas are expressible turns out to be fantastically productive. And it turns out it is so productive that you are actually better off tolerating getting the short end of the stick in the West than you are getting your fair share in a much less productive system, which is a
agree with this
strong
completely.
argument for not going down this road.
That's right.
So
I would like citations on that. And more importantly, Bret is simultaneously, you probably didn't notice this trick, he's simultaneously saying, you're, and he's referring to a single person, better off in a system that allows for free speech, whatever, right? Or free ideas or something. I mean, ideas are not free, but they appear to be free. Fair enough, whatever. Like, fine, I'll give you free ideas. Stupid idea, stupid concept rather. You're better off in that kind of, you are better off in that kind of system than in a system that is more rigid but punishes you. Okay, is the system better off? Can a system survive in any other way? The answer is no, by the way. I just want to speed it up. No. Like, by definition, somebody has to lose and somebody has to win in any system. That's why the communists are leftists and the fascists are leftists. They're not arguing over system or no system. They're arguing over whose system is the winning system. And that just, in both cases, happened to involve, and the fundamental difference too is, you're going to love what the fundamental difference is. This is going to be great, but I'll get there. Right? It just happens to involve my guys get the benefit at the top and run the thing versus my guys get the benefit at the top and run the thing. The only difference from that particular perspective, not in all perspectives, right? The only difference is the fascists are honest that they're going to take it over and they're going to run things and they're going to do it right. And the communists are busy pretending no one has to run anything and everything will be all right anyway. But they're actually in charge, so they're sneaky. That's really the big difference there. And once you realize it, you're like, oh, that's why the fascists won. Because they were strong men, right? Well, you can't be sneaky and appear to be strong at the same time. By definition, kind of, right? Like, you could kind of like look at Stalin and go, well, he was not a strong man. He was in the background. I mean, he was the strong man. He killed people, right? That's what he did, among other things. He also controlled the information flow to everybody. That might be important. He also didn't start things, right? Lenin was killing long before these other clowns, right? No one ever mentions that. I don't know why. Must be a random coincidence. Or the leftists are defending some kind of leftism or something. Wouldn't that be weird? So you have this situation where somebody comes along and says, I'm your guy, I'm strong, and I'm going to do the thing. And it's going to be great and glorious. Or you have these guys who are sneakily trying to take over, but there's no signal of strength whatsoever. But then people are dying left, right, and center. Yes. But that's the big difference. Right? The other difference is around things like property rights. Like fascism just recognizes that obviously property rights have to exist, and therefore all ideas of property must serve the state. And that solves, or appears to solve, the private property problem by making, you can still have private property, it just has to be in service of the state, and it can't be in service of your personal needs or the needs of your community or the needs of your society. It has to be towards the government's needs, effectively. That's what fascism says. And communism just lies and says, no, nobody needs to have any property because everybody can just, according to their needs and according to their ability, magic, gobbledygook. That's the difference. They're both leftist socialist ideologies, however. And their ideologies, they don't account for change in time, basically. They don't account for children. They can't account for these things. That's why they're ideologies.
Again, we're going to get back to the problem of putting some names in this category, which I think the reason that there is a problem is that you're very early in spotting the crystallization of this process. You think you know where it's going, and you don't know because you don't know.
How early do you think I am? How long do you think that this has been a
I
phenomenon?
want to know who's on the list. Is there anybody that I know and talk to regularly who's actually in this category?
I don't know who you talk to regularly. I think Tucker Carlson's in the category. You know who he is.
Here's why I don't think Tucker Carlson's in the category. Because Tucker Carlson talks to people like me all the time.
So?
Look.
Okay. They're both right. That's so weird. James would have to explain why it's a so. And he can't because his whole system's complete garbage. But Bret doesn't get it. Bret thinks as long as his voice is heard, he's in the free market of ideas, and therefore. Right? That's what he thinks. As long as people hear my smart ideas, I'm represented and everything's cool. That's his thinking here, for sure. Like, he's practically laid it out, so I feel pretty confident saying that. And so it's met all his criteria, so he's good. And James is like, just because someone gives you a voice, right? So Stalin famously erased a guy from a picture. Like, yeah, he gave him his voice for a while, and then he took it away, right? This is what I mean by they don't account for time. Right. How else do you see them not accounting for time? I was a comedian. I made a racist joke, or a joke that would now be considered racist 10 years ago, and now that's the same thing. You're not accounting for time at all. You're pretending as though time and change don't exist. Weird. It's almost like a flat world or something.
I'm not a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I'm damn close to an atheist.
Mm-hmm.
He understands me to be a patriotic American. He values my opinion. He allows his audience to hear it. So the point is, there's nothing about Tucker Carlson that is excluding people like me, or Glenn Greenwald, frankly, from the conversation. He is behaving, I think, Tucker, I would say, is one of the people who does not understand why I'm obsessed with the distinction between nationalism and patriotism, right? I think he hears it, but I don't think it changes his way of viewing these things. So I understand that there's a part of him that just feels like, I'll screw this, right? But at the level of who he's choosing to amplify and talk to and listen to, it's actually pretty darn diverse. And that sounds to me like the precise opposite of woke.
But before you
Okay. Now, here's something subtle. You probably wouldn't have seen this. Fair. You wouldn't have seen this, most likely. If you did, that's great. Bonus points. Like, get a scorecard, write down for whatever scoring system you're using, write down right at the top. It's fine. What Bret has described, he has described in a positive fashion. Let me give you the negative case, okay? Because when Bret would talk about somebody who, say, has bad ideas, that he still wanted to be heard, his assumption is, well, they'll hear those ideas, they'll know that they're bad, and they'll get kicked out of the, quote, free market of ideas, or they'll be properly valued within the free market of ideas. Right now, that never happens, by the way. I don't know why. It must be because their framework is wrong, but, it could be something else, I guess. No, it couldn't. Whatever. And so he made the positive case without the negative case. They just flip the script on this all the time, right? Because they only have a free market of ideas. And he values, he said it right there, right? It's almost like I can read minds or predict or something, right? Or I've listened to him before and he says the same 4 things over and over again, like all the leftists do, although they're different 4 things, but they're still only 4 of them. Oh, I value conversation. Conversation is the highest thing. As long as he lets me be heard and amplifies my signal, then we're all set. However, if he has Daryl Cooper on, everyone has a fit on the left. Now, I don't have any such illusions about, quote, free speech, the way these lunatics are defining it, which is an impossible state anyway. No, you should not listen to any lunatic that happens. If a guy has brain damage, don't listen to him. He's got brain damage. Schizophrenic, don't listen to him. He's schizophrenic. Like, this isn't that hard, right? At some level. It might be hard to determine that for some people, but there are plenty of people who have no problem determining that. Of course, you'd have to listen to them. That's where the problem is. Who do you listen to? That's a different problem, right? But if you don't solve the who do you listen to problem, the quote free market of ideas just becomes chaotic, which is where we are now. Weird. That might be a hint. So this is the problem with what Bret's saying, is that while he may believe it and he may act that out, he just flips it on its head. No sane person who wants to preserve anything or is capable of preserving anything is going to say you should let anybody speak under any circumstance. No, you should not. A bad idea, repeated over and over again, will be adopted. The world is attention, as Jonathan Peugeot says. It's that simple. Therefore, you cannot give attention to just anyone. Period. End of statement. Not that hard. No one likes that answer, at least not on the left, but that's too bad, because there isn't a better answer. There isn't even another answer. Because the result of letting everybody speak, say on the internet, is chaos. That's what it is. Especially if you also destroy the institutions like the Fourth Estate. Talked about the fall of the Fourth Estate before. Of course, I have a video on that.
Defend, I'd like you to make the case, because I'm interested.
Well, I want to ask a question to get this case rolling.
Okay.
What if you had to?
Hold on. Mike, again with the clarity. I want you to make your case. James, nah, I'm going to ask you a question. That's wizardry, right? That's sorcery right there. Okay. If somebody says, hey, I want you to make your case, or hey, what's your thing about? And you go, well, what do you think it's about? Or you go, I want to ask you a question first. What? Now, if somebody comes to me and they say, Mark, I watched your video on blah, blah, blah. I want you to make your case on X. I'll be like, well, what in my video wasn't clear, right? Because I already made my case in my video. Valid move. In this case, James has not attempted to make a case yet. He's still blither-blathering about communism and Marxism and how they're not the same, or they are the same, or maybe they're the same, or maybe there's neo-Marxism. Like, I don't know what he's saying about that anymore because he hasn't been coherent yet. Maybe he'll get coherent someday, although with that posture, I don't know, man. Can you be coherent when you're slouching in your chair and faceless guy? I don't know. Maybe you can. Let's find out.
To describe Tucker's MO in terms of what he presents on his show, not necessarily just who he platforms, but the ideas that he presents, how he validates ideas, what ideas he thinks are the most important for people to listen to. And you had to do it within the framework that the left refers to as other ways of knowing. Would that be an easy or difficult project?
So this is all fascinating. Again, they have some of the right stuff. Right? So James is saying some very right things. It matters what he emphasizes. Yeah, that's actually true. And you can't emphasize all things equally because there's too many things. It's not easy. Limited resources. You have a limited amount of time. There's a limited amount of bandwidth. People have a limited amount of bandwidth. You can't do an 8-hour live stream all the time. No one's going to watch. I've done 8-hour live streams. I'm quite capable. Thank you very much. I can't do it all the time. It doesn't make any sense. If I did, it'd be boring. People are like, oh, he does that all the time. I'm not listening to 8 hours. It's not equal. It's not equal because the audience won't make it equal. Regardless of how equal you think you can make it. This idea of equality still relies on objective material reality. Okay, so he's right about that. But you notice he's split things up into, it's not about who you converse with suddenly. Right? Now, it's about who you prioritize, who you give preference to. So the conversations are right out of the window now. So this is the split in values. James values the messaging, and Bret only cares about whether or not there's a free market for his ideas. It's clear as day.
In other words, marginalized epistemologies, marginalized knowledges. This is more
it may be a flaw of mine, but try it in simpler terms.
One of the key components of the woke epistemology, as we typically understand the term woke, which is called critical constructivist epistemology, if you want the technical terminology, which was outlined by a guy named Joe Kinchelow in 2005. Just to know the history, there is a book by the title Critical Constructivism. And so he devotes a very large portion of that book to talking about how it functions as a system of knowing.
Here's the thing. There's some book.
No,
I don't.
no.
No, look,
This is the book of woke.
No, I'm sorry.
It is.
All right. James has spent a lot of time learning the explanations that other people give for their leftist, socialist, resentment-based agenda. This is actually why he says, oh, no, we have to differentiate Marxism and communism, because Marx had a different explanation than critical theory, obviously, which came after him, which is just a rebirth of resentment, which is what all communism, leftism, and socialism is based on. It's based on resentment. It's not based on anything else. Leftism is based on resentment. That's what it's based on. There may be elements of it that are not resentful or could be framed as not resentful. But again, they're just based on standard imperfections that happen all the time. And it doesn't differentiate between resentment and valid complaint, which Bret sort of identified, by the way, earlier in the conversation. Fair enough. Like, smart. Again, like there's a lot of nuggets in here that are not wrong. It's just they're put together poorly. Their comprehension is poor. The putting together of the things is incorrect, even though the things, most of them, are correct. Some of them are incorrect, by the way. And so what you have is, now you've got three categories. You've got Marxism, neo-Marxism, and this critical thing. Maybe neo-Marxism and critical thing are the same thing. I don't know. James hasn't really said. Hasn't defined neo-Marxism yet. Maybe he's intending to or implying that this critical theory stuff and neo-Marxism, that's the same thing. Well, fair enough, right? And we've already identified, Bret's already identified, this goes back further. It's a pattern, right? And he misidentified it and said it's a recent pattern or something, and not, oh, this is the entire history of the West, which it certainly is, and not the entire history of the Middle East or the East. Also, I think I can make that case pretty clearly in history. So you have to kind of notice these things somehow. I mean, I don't know how you're going to do it. Like, the easier thing to do is not to listen to clowns. These guys are clowns. Sorry. They just are. Watch the fools, as Jonathan Peugeot says. Don't watch the fools. Look away. Look very far away. They're fools. They're going to make up more crazy stuff. That's what they seem to want to do.
You're talking to a guy who was literally chased off his own campus as if he was a witch for possessing racist beliefs that he did not possess.
Yeah.
I know a lot about woke. I don't need to read the book. So
Wait a minute.
what? I mean, I lived it.
That's what they said to you at Evergreen.
What?
Where is the evidence? Asking for evidence.
No,
is
no.
racist.
I'm telling you. Well, no.
I lived it. I don't need evidence.
I remember that.
What is James saying? Living through something isn't evidence of it? What is your standard of evidence, James? It's a book that no one read. No one read that book. No one. It's a handful of people ever read that book. So all the people that believe in wokeism didn't read the woke book. How did they come by the wokeness? It's weird. Like, his thesis doesn't hold up. It's logically inconsistent. Your standard of evidence isn't I lived it. What? Okay, you got to tell me your standard of evidence now, just for my curiosity factor, even though I'm going to laugh at you when you do. Because it doesn't matter what you say. If your standard of evidence isn't experience, I got questions. I got real questions. Like, I'm not saying you can't have alternative forms of evidence, but your standard of evidence sure as hell better be having been there and experienced it. Otherwise, we're all in really bad trouble. We're in really bad trouble here, James. We're way down the well, buddy. Way down. There ain't no you're at the bottom of a hole with a shovel, and you're still digging. That's the problem there. You ain't gonna get out of the hole, pal. What? That's remarkable. That's actually remarkable. Stunning stupidity. Absolutely stunning. I gotta see what Bret does. Because at this point, I'd say, what's your standard of evidence for pain? And get up and punch him in the face. Say, is that evidence? Because you say it's a book. Why don't you go read a book and get punched in the face? Tell me if that's better evidence. And Oh, I would do that. Oh, yes, I would. Done it before.
That clip in the film, but the point is, you're telling me that our discussion hinges on a book that I have not read.
No, our discussion, I was going to describe to you what this means.
Well, but you've already lost me.
Half of the book.
Why does it require so much verbiage?
But I wonder if I can translate, because no, I can't translate yet.
Hold on. No. You don't have to read the book. I read the book. I'll tell you what it means. The whole conversation hinges on James's definitions by his own admission. Well, I guess if that's the way we're going, James, then you have to be right, because there's no other logical possibility. Congratulations, bro. You won the quote argument. Like, really? You don't have to read the book. I'll let you know. That's awesome. So when I did The Lies of Plato's Cave, I gave you the references in the book, and I say, go open the freaking book and look at it. You don't have to take my word for it. James does the exact opposite. Now you can pick who to listen to. You can listen to me, or you can listen to him. I don't care at this point. If you listen to him, you get what you deserve. That's all I'm gonna tell you. Collect, sucker.
I'm trying to hear it. Yeah.
No. But
I'm trying to let me hear him out, and I'll see if I can translate.
Hold on, just 1 second.
Okay.
You are putting an idea, right? A 2-word idea into the world, and you are saying this is a useful category. Now, if we talk about the woke revolution, the intersectional one, it does not require you to read a book to figure out who belongs to this ideology. In fact, many of the woke...
No. We had this argument, not you and I, but culturally, we had this argument for years. I spent 2 years, Bret, on stages across the country speaking to sympathetic conservatives and libertarians, trying to convince them of this following thing, that critical race theory, that's 3 words. If you take out the middle word and just get critical theory, I spent 2 years trying to convince America, conservative America, that critical race theory is a form of critical theory. All you have to do is delete the modifier in the middle and you're there.
Before you go, so
This was not an easy discussion for people, for CRT, for woke on the left.
I think
See, this is amazing. He has the tools that I've talked about. Like, you can simplify the language and just take it seriously and infer a bunch of things correctly. But he can't do that. He can simplify the language and divide it up and come to the complete wrong conclusions. That's amazing. It's like a super skill. We should figure out how to harness that one. He gets the gold medal for, like, what would that be? Illogical, irrational, unreasonable, ridiculous, and silly thinking? I guess that's what it is. Let's go with that. Like, this is remarkable. This is absolutely unbelievable to me. Then he could be so close and so right on so many pieces and come to all the exact wrong conclusions. It's got to be like, we got to come up with an award for this. We must.
I'm
15
sympathetic.
seconds.
Yeah.
Darwin spent more than a decade, trying to wrestle his hypothesis into a presentable form. We can now summarize it in less than a paragraph. So my point is, I get that there's a lot of work that went into you figuring out what it is you think you see. I don't get why it is so hard to convey it and why we have to reference
let me say it in
texts.
very simple words very quickly. Woke epistemology means a preference for outside knowledges. There is a truth regime that excludes everything that would threaten its power base. And so anything outside of that truth regime is more likely to be valid and true because it challenges the existing power structure. That's woke. That's literally woke.
I think.
What the hell did he just say? I don't know what he said. A truth regime. Okay, those 2 words don't go together. I don't know what else to say. You can't just put the word truth with any other word. Truth ice cream. Truth sandwich. Truth foot. Truth regime. This is all the same gobbledygook word salad nonsense. What is epistemology? What are you talking? People don't think in epistemology. Like, it's not a concept in people's heads. It's the statement of the science of knowledge or something stupid, like something just dumb. Like people use the word epistemology, don't listen to them, immediately shut them off. Immediately. There's one thing they don't know anything about: knowledge. That's for sure. Guaranteed on that one. Guarantee you that right away. The minute you start talking about knowledge, you're so far away from knowledge, it's not worth thinking about anymore. Technically. This is truly remarkable. Like, that was all word salad. Right. And so he tried to summarize it into an easy to understand thing and made it so abstract that he's smashing words together that don't belong together. Truth microphone.
I think you just maybe I didn't understand what you said, but I think you just inverted woke. It is not a preference for anything outside of the power structure. It is a preference for a very particular alternative. Right? The idea, intersectionality.
Because it has to challenge the existing power structure.
Yeah, it's a successor
but
ideology.
It's not anything outside.
No,
it's a very specific, very outside thing.
Correct.
Oh. So James failed to make his point and then had to acquiesce that Bret was right. And this is what I was saying all along, right? It's not, we don't want a power structure. It's, we want this kind of power structure. It just doesn't look like that kind of power structure. And James is correct. The mechanism is get all the people unhappy with the current power structure convinced that you're going to give them the power structure they want, or maybe no power structure at all, because maybe that's what they think they want. And then you take over the power structure. Yeah, that's resentment. That's the communist pattern or the socialist pattern, the Marxist pattern, the neo-Marxist pattern, whatever, the critical theory pattern. Yeah, it's all the same thing. Absolutely. Gather together all the unhappy people who have resentment and convince them that you're going to give them what they want, and they will help you overthrow the current power structure. And then you, the smart people, are going to use the stupid NPCs and give them a different power structure that they're going to be equally unhappy with, for sure. The only happy people are going to be the people that understand the game. Yeah, pretty much. That's socialism in a nutshell. Yep. And that is in keeping with, again, my video on the trick of socialism. That's exactly what's going on, right? And so, but see, the way he has to phrase it is wrong, right? Because he has to say everything outside. No, he doesn't even understand what he's saying. Like, that's the problem.
Very pragmatic as well. So maybe we talk about if we're talking about ideologies and their connections, well, let's talk about what ideology is. And I think Carl Benjamin might have come up with this definition, and it's great. It's ideology is political programming for NPCs.
I mean, that's a definition. The best treatment of ideology I ever read was in Charles Mill's book, From Class to Race, where he explains why he stopped being a classical Marxist and started being a critical race theorist.
I mean, I'm just giving a hyperlink. We can talk more and more until we write a book.
That it is a function. You could use the word secular if you want.
Yeah.
But it is functionally a mythology that the ruling powers tell as the story to the entire population, including themselves, to convince them that's how society really works.
Political programming for NPCs, because both of these sides want something. They want power. Yeah. And so they've created structural stories in order to mobilize large groups of people, to unite and mobilize large groups of people.
Okay. Ideologies aren't stories, so that's wrong. Right? They're specifically, inherently never stories. They're certainly not mythologies. That's just wrong. Maybe the problem here, these people need to read books that aren't dry academic treatments and propaganda. Or propaganda is probably a bad word for me in particular to use. Books designed to show you a particular lens on the world from a particular perspective with a particular aim in mind. Okay, so stories don't do that, by the way. Like, that's actually how you know a story, right? A story is designed for you to see many different potential things in it, right? That's what a good story looks like. Everything else is either a bad story, a technical manual, or what people might refer to as propaganda. Not the only thing they refer to as propaganda, but in other words, an agenda-driven, tight, rigid structure where you're actually only supposed to come to one possible conclusion, right? And so James has been reading those types of things, right? One possible conclusion. Obviously, right? It's one structure, right? Okay, so we're going to go with my definition of ideology, which is way better than these clowns' definition of ideology. And this idea of NPC is ridiculous, because if you want NPCs, there's 3 of them in this video all at once. They're all NPCs. They're following slightly different programming, but only slightly, but it's all leftist programming, right? And the left is very good for stupid people. I hate to say it, but also, like, the data's in. And there is data to back this up, which just cracks me up that their own system betrays them to be the more easily manipulated, the lower IQ on average, the whole 9 yards. It cracks me up. It's just the funniest thing to me. So, and you just look that up. Like, it's all over the place. So basically, an ideology is a worldview that does not account for time and change. The easiest way to spot one is to say, does this account for children? If it doesn't account for children, either their birth, right, or their formation, not education. Education is the wrong word. Formation, right, and the significance of that formation, which is what Plato's Republic is about, by the way. Blows my mind. Nobody talks about that. Then it's an ideology. It's a flat world, unchanging view of how things should be. And of course, those are always disastrous, because it just turns out, are you sitting down? Are you, like, prepare you to take a deep breath? We live in an imperfect, ever-changing world, and we're imperfect people. And so a non-changing system is not a good fit for us. It's that simple. Really. It really is that easy. Problem solved. I don't know why. These guys are putting... You need an IQ of 86 to do this. And they can't manage it because their IQs are too high. Sorry. Like, intellectual yet idiot is what Taleb calls them. I call them overeducated morons. They think they're not NPCs. Otherwise, they wouldn't use the term NPC, because they'd be the fish in the aquarium. But they are definitely NPCs. This cracks me up.
I want to wrestle this to something simple enough to comprehend, to pass on, and to critique.
I'm sorry. I'm gonna note something. You cannot verbally wrestle. This is actually something that, like, Plato or Aristotle probably would have struck you dead for implying. Because they're not stupid. Unlike the people in this video who would love to elevate what they do to some higher form, like wrestling. Wrestling is a much higher form than yapping your fat mouth, especially when you're a little stupid or you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Right? And so we're going to elevate it to wrestling. Sound important. Like there's some value there. Like, we have physical prowess. Maybe Mike does. He's also the most clear thinker. That's kind of what Plato and Aristotle were saying too. Like, you can't be a clear, good thinker, philosopher, true philosopher, unless you're in the gym more than you're in the grove. What a weird coincidence. It's a random coincidence, guys. Ignore it.
It shouldn't require James' presence to operate the thing.
Yeah.
If it's a real thing, it ought to operate.
Interrogation of power structures.
Well, here's the point. You say they want power. I'm going to say, you know what? That's the default state of nature. There is one alternative to it. That alternative is the West, in which we agree that we actually want a level playing field. Now, is that stable in the long term? Can it be? I suspect so, but I don't know. But it is the alternative to every faction is going to want more power for itself. Okay? The idea that I actually, given the opportunity to corral power, to hoard it, will actually prefer to level the playing field for future generations. That is a counterintuitive way of being. And my point is, it doesn't actually mean I want less power. It means that I will end up with more absolute, I don't mean political power, but more absolute ability to control my environment and make it the way I want it to be, more liberty, if I engage in leveling the playing field, and therefore everybody having a stake in protecting that level playing field rather than playing, king of the hill all the time. I will have more of whatever that liberty is in absolute terms if I agree with others to protect the level playing field than I will get if I decide to cheat and unlevel the playing field. So it is an alternative. I don't know that it can be stabilized long term. My sense is it works great during productive times, and then it gets overthrown as the music stops in musical chairs. But the story that you're telling...
All right. Wow. That's so remarkable. So if you just like use basic logic, you don't get complicated. This is not complicated. Breaking this level of thought down is really not hard. Brett's not making any sense at all. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay. What is a level playing field? What would that look like? How would one implement it? Do you, as a person, single person, have the ability to affect the levelness of the playing field? No, but we do as a group. How would we agree on that? Oh, we need a power structure to do that, technically. Oops. There goes your system. Another problem. We only have this in the West, so everywhere else they're just power-driven, and that's it? And that's not sustainable somehow? So China hasn't been around for thousands of years? Like, I don't get, like, what are you talking about? Like, what are you talking about? The implication, the clear, unavoidable implication is that all the things that aren't the West are power-based and haven't survived. Now, if they have survived, you gotta start saying something else. Like, I don't understand. I'm not saying that case can't be made, by the way. I'm saying Bret can't make it. He doesn't understand what he's saying at all. But what he is doing is protecting individualism. Like, that is the clearest example of an individualistic worldview that I've ever heard. And that's the thing. Bret sometimes has a clarity that's amazing. Like, it's absolutely remarkable. Again, unfortunately, he draws all the wrong conclusions from his clarity, but because he's so individualistic and so materialistic that he just comes to the dumbest ideas. Because logic will lead you astray every time. Every time. If you make an assumption like individualism is preferable. Now, you notice, he makes a statement at one point about the most power I have as a being or something, right? No. The most power you have as a being is perpetuating being itself. In other words, the abstraction of being that is not just you and not just you through time, but your lineage through time, which would include your ancestors. Of course, by the way, they never mention any of this stuff. They never mention their ancestors. They never mention the past. They never mention preserving anything from the past. They don't mention what's good from the past. They just never do. They'd spot a leftist. There you go. You can spot a leftist every time. It's real easy. They never mention these things, ever. They will not in a positive light, right? Always in a negative light. Being transcends your personal private perspective, your, quote, individual personhood, or however you want to frame that nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. There's no such thing as an individual, right? It transcends that. It's built into the term. It's built into to be is something greater than you are alive. How do I know that? Because those two phrases aren't the same. That's why we use different words. It's not that hard. You form your children. Part of your being lives on through them. Right? And so, leveling the playing field absolutely 100% would not have the effect that Bret implies. One of the very big problems these people have is, I mean, they talk they leveling the playing field. Okay, that's fine. Okay. Now, if you level the playing field to make everybody a millionaire, it's still level. But what if, just spitballing here, resources were finite? I mentioned that earlier. Okay, so if you level the playing field and say the players aren't equal, you'll notice, by the way, these people don't like sports. That's a weird coincidence. Level the playing field, but you don't have equal players, and you have finite resources, and you allocate those resources equally. What will happen? Just mathematical model. You can model this math. It's been done. You can do it yourself. Actually, it's not that hard. If you know a little bit of programming, probably have AI whip it up for you. The field goes down for everybody. Right? It's a principle in mathematics called lowest common denominator. That's how you equalize something in an unlevel set. Right? Is you seek the lowest common denominator. Okay, that's why all socialism fails, because all socialism is based on equality, and all equality has to seek the lowest common denominator and then conform to that. If you need a story about that, I recommend the story Harrison Bergeron. It's a nice short story. It explains this quite nicely in story form, right? You will not see an ideology in that. You will read a story. You will have many different ways and opportunities. In other words, you can read it over and over again, come out with new stuff every time. Weird, right? Because it's a good story to understand the principle that I'm talking about. The only way to make everybody equal is to find the lowest common denominator and cut everybody down to that. In other words, drop the level playing field way lower than it is. Okay, and that's actually why communism fails. That's why all socialist forms of government fail. That's why. Now, to the extent that fascism appears to succeed at that, it doesn't make everyone equal. It makes a slave class that must serve the higher class, and then they put their favored group, whatever. I mean, James' designators are not entirely correct at all, and certainly too limited, but they're not entirely wrong either. Like, I mean, culture almost always goes with ethnicity, but whatever. Ethnicity plus geography. Those are the two things that generally determine a cohesive culture. When you say, all right, our ethnicity, right, because it's a bigger group than culture, as I just outlined, right, because culture plus geography makes subgroups automatically, right? The mountain people and the plains people, even though they might be the same genetic stock, are just not going to have the same worldview. They're going to have differences in language and everything else. This is everywhere in everywhere. Every paper you read, it's everywhere. Or you can just observe it, right? If you live in the United States, go to the hill country, hear how they talk. Go to the ocean, hear how they talk. Go to the plains, hear how they talk. Right? And even different ethnicities use very different words in the same geography. So there's a blending there, right? It's a very messy affair to try to divide it into these neat categories like the sciencey people do. Okay, so once you understand that fascism just creates a two-class system with one class running the state and the other class giving everything they have to the running of the state, which they state explicitly. They're very honest about that. Hey, bang! It looks like you can have a level, quote, level playing field up here. Just not everybody's on the level playing field. Right? And because these guys have no sense of vertical causality, right? Good and bad, up and down, like actually, they fall into this trap. Like it's that simple. Like you're always going to fall into that trap. In other words, when you're trapped in the flat worldview of leftism, you're a socialist because you have no choice. Because people have to be equal. And equality doctrine does that. It's what equality doctrine does. It can't do anything else. Right? Because it's just limited in how many moves it can make because it's flat. By definition. It defines itself as flat.
I believe you are warning us about something. Yes. And that warning is important because the process you're talking about can catch you off guard and it can
it operates like every other coup, very slowly, then all at once.
And all at once, right. So I'm on board with the idea that, hey, if I love the idea of the West and I want the West to work, I got to be very careful to keep an eye out for the thing you're talking about. I've got to be very careful not to embolden people who are committed to the thing you're talking about. But then you tell me it's Tucker Carlson, and I feel like, well, I've sat with this guy when there are no cameras on. He loves the West, and he does not want me excluded from it because I'm Jewish or progressive. As far as I can tell, he's actually, you can translate from his perspective to mine, and there isn't that big a gap, because at the end of the day, he does want the playing field leveled and stabilized. But you tell me I'm misunderstanding.
And he's not an ideologue.
Okay. Let me just explain to you that Bret doesn't understand what he said. What he said was, the conservatives are the tolerant good guys. That is true. They will tolerate the crazy leftists and give them what they want to some small extent. They're the good guys. They're the all-inclusive ones. You know who's not? The people on the left. They're just proving it right here. James is going, there's the woke right. We've got to get rid of them. What are you doing, dude? And then, of course, leftists, because they're leftists, they can never agree on anything because they're not a cohesive, structured, ordered group. They are the people who refuse to be ordered. They are the people who want to impose their own order. And then when they find people that they think are like them, they get together for a while. And then they always break apart. You want to spot a leftist? There you go. How many groups have you belonged to? How many times have you changed your mind about certain things? Right? Certain things, not all things. Right? Some things you shouldn't change your mind about, like good and evil. Not a fan of evil, haven't changed my mind. Big fan of goodness, haven't changed my mind. Don't foresee that happening in either case. I think that's okay. We can argue, right? And your discernment can change over time. But that's not the same as changing your mind. So, for example, you can be buddy-buddy with Jeffrey Epstein until you find out what he's doing, and then change your mind. Okay, but that's more information, change your mind, right? No more information, and you change your mind. What's going on there? Oh, because someone told you something new that was equally untrue to the thing you knew before. Ooh, leftism. It's that simple. These people are unprincipled. They appear principled. They'll talk about principles, but they won't enact them, and they won't hold other people to them. They may point out that other people aren't following what they think of as a principle, which never is, by the way. It's usually just, like I said, like cancel culture. Did someone get fired for a good reason or a bad reason? That's a good question. Now it's all canceling to James. What? Why would that be true? You can never remove an incompetent person from their position. You can never get rid of somebody who suddenly hit the sauce or is now a drug addict, or like, what are you talking about? And of course you say, oh, no, of course that's not what I'm saying. No, that is what you're saying. Maybe you don't realize that's what you're saying. You didn't make a differentiation between cancel culture and getting fired because you're useless or incompetent or were put in the wrong place or changed. Change. That's what they can't account for. Very mysterious that they can't account for change. So, look, it's 2 hours. I'm tired. I'm amused, but I think I'm going to have to cut it there. And look, I'm just trying to show you this stuff so that you can recognize some of the patterns and signs and avoid it. And then figure out who you're going to listen to. And please, not any of these three guys. I like Mike. I mean, look, I'd sit down and have a drink with any one of them. I think they're probably fine people at that level. It's when they're playing a level above their heads at the group level, they don't understand groups. They just don't. They don't understand because you can hear it in their language, right? Like, well, at the personal level, blah, 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 blah. And then they scale that up to a group, or they do the general for specific mixing. Like, what are you doing, dude? The rules change when there's two people in the room. Period. In all cases, it's fine for me to be, naked in my house when there's no one else in the house. Like, that's fine. Right? It's not fine for me to go to the grocery store naked. I like, this isn't that hard. Like, it's that simple. The rules change when it's not just you. So you'll always notice they always set the rules when it's just them. I'd have a level playing field. This is good for me. This is how it benefits me as a being. It's, what? No. Being has nothing to do with your personal private perspective or your personhood or you. Being is bigger than that. Like, that's how we use the term. That's the only possible way to use the term. Otherwise, you just use the term me. Me is not a being. Ever. You may belong to being itself. That's a better way to talk about it. But you are not a being. There's such thing as a being in that way. You can be. Very different. It may seem like, subtle semantics. It's not. It's like structural in the language for a reason. Now, these people would object because they don't like structure. They don't like order. They want to be able to put things together the way they want to put them together. I've demonstrated that over and over again. So I hope you noticed. Look, I appreciate that you guys are watching. I hope you're finding this helpful. And thank you for your time and attention.